Hello and welcome to A Woman's Heart. I'm Lisa Granger. What if you knew the price you might pay to follow God was high? Would you still say yes? Valerie Juillerat said yes and did not look back. She shares how she trusted God to get her through the loss of her dream home, dream job, and her son's battles with addiction. God was her anchor in the storms that swirled around her for years, and she is grateful now for the lessons of resilience, humility, and faith. And I would love to hear how I can serve you this year. What sort of guests, topics, or challenges do you want me to tackle for you? Catch me on social media or email me at lisa@lisagranger.com. Now for our time with Valerie. Hello, welcome to A Woman's Heart. Today I have a special treat. I get to interview a friend of mine, and we have Valerie Juillerat. So thanks so much for joining us today, Valerie.
Oh, it's an honor. It really is.
Well, good. And we met at Speak Up. I know for anyone who's listened to the podcast, they've probably heard me mention Speak Up a number of times. And we were in a small group there where we met, and we got to hear a little bit of your story, but I certainly didn't get to read all of it. That is in your new book that has come out, and which we're going to go into a little bit more. But before we get started on that, I would love for my listeners to get a chance to know you a little bit. So tell us about yourself. And I like to ask for something fun that isn't normally in your bio as well.
Well, the thing that's not so fun is I'm a tax preparer. So we've got
that's
tax
not so
season
much
coming
fun.
up. So I don't have a life for about 3 months. But something fun. Well, a lot of people don't know, unless you've read my book, that I had an opportunity to go to Africa.
Yes.
While I was in Africa, we were working with the military, and we were giving them the tips and tricks to how to translate the Bible into their own language. So they were trying to make a language, or like a military language of their own. Okay. And so we got to ride in the Jeeps and stuff with the military. They drove us around. And we were actually stationed at a school compound. But these guys were absolutely amazing, because they were opening my door and they were carrying my bags and they were, escorting us around. And I was feeling like Princess Di in this country. And so I always tell my family this was my Princess Di experience, because they were just amazing. But
yes, well, how fun!
So they would even, like, we were trying to go to the school, and there was so much traffic and everything, and they were blocking the roads, and these guys would get out and they would beat on the tops of their hoods to make them move so that we could get past.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. That was quite the experience.
Yes, quite the experience in that. That was very different from my Africa experience. But, but what a wonderful opportunity that you were able to have over there. And there were so many God moments regarding your trip to Africa that you talk about in your book. And since we've already referenced it, tell us what your book is. It's a really hard story, but a lot of hope involved in it too. So tell us about your book, and I would love to know a little bit of how this book came to be.
Well, the book title is Finding Hope When Storms Don't Cease. And it's based around a 3-year period of my life where I had lost my dream home, I lost my dream business, and both my sons got into the world of drugs and alcohol. And in a mix of some of that was the Africa story as well.
Yes.
There was a lot of God lessons through it. It was a very, very hard time, but God was just so gracious through all the trials.
Yeah.
The book is a compilation of my story and my 2 sons' stories. They actually write their side of the story as well. And that kind of makes it unique and very interesting. And it gave them some encouragement to start sharing from their side as well.
Yeah.
But the whole goal is just to give people hope through their own storms of life.
Yeah. Well, and we all have our different storms, and you definitely had one after the other. I thought it was interesting, the analogy of the storms. All of your chapter titles are like storm things. So how did you come up with just kind of a fun one. How did you come up with all of the different storm references for your chapters?
I had to Google it. Yeah. Yeah, well, my one of my editors had recommended doing that, and it's like, okay, how do I tie these into the chapters? And so I was doing a lot of researching in what definitions were, and learned a lot of new words through it.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose so. Because yeah, there was a lot of different ones, and you go, "Oh, things are getting better," and then, oh my gosh. And as I mentioned beforehand, reading through the book, it really was a page turner. It was just I just kept wanting to know what was going to happen next. And as I've also mentioned, there was a lot. It just kind of seemed to one thing after another, and yet your faith stayed strong. And what sort of foundation? Because I know you mentioned that it maybe not inspiring, but grounding. It was a time where you really grew a lot closer to the Lord, but you were already grounded beforehand. And I believe that helped. So, what sort of a foundation did you have or in that you used to help draw you closer to him in the middle of all of this?
Well, I did grow up with both of my grandfathers were pastors.
Mhm.
And just from a very young age, my grandmother really instilled faith into me. You have to find your own faith, but at the same time,
Mhm.
she continued to love me to that point to where I saw Christ through her and my grandfather as well.
It really is interesting. I know some people, it's hard to get grounded in your faith or really grow if you don't have any kind of a foundation when you're in the middle of the storms. And one of the things that kept coming to my mind was David in the Psalms, and where he would say he had to encourage himself. Is that something you would say that you had to do?
Definitely. Yes. I Part of the story is that I had been through a really bad marriage for 8 years.
Hmm.
He was an alcoholic and he was never physically abusive, but very verbally and emotionally abusive.
Yeah.
And so that affected both my children and me. So when we had divorced, and then I met another man that just swept me off my feet. He was everything I wanted. He was charming and good looking, and he had a strong faith as well. And we both are dreamers. We had a very strong connection because we both have dreams, and we were able to, on a spiritual level, connect because of that.
Hmm.
And then he decided to move to Texas. And he left me behind and broke my heart. And
Oh.
and that is really where I had to start digging deep because I was completely alone. I had two boys at home trying to raise, and this was before they really started getting into trouble.
Hmm.
Because of that loss, I mean, it was just an intense grief that I have never experienced before. And to me, it was almost like death because it was like I lost half my soul.
Yeah.
I'd never connected to anybody that way. I spent all my time when I was home alone. I spent all my time praying. I had praise music on. I was researching. I was doing Bible studies. I was listening to preachers on TV. I did a lot of Joyce Meyer and Robert Morris and people like that that I feel were my became my mentors.
Hmm.
And so I learned a lot through their lessons as well and did a lot of journaling. And that's how a lot of this book came about, was
Yeah.
because I had those pages to go back to.
Hmm.
And I have to thank a dear friend of mine who got me that journal years ago, and she put in there about making my dreams come true, and those dreams ended up being true dreams,
Yes.
and so that it all unfolded in the pages. But that period of time when I lost him was when I really started growing deeper and deeper and having a better understanding of God because there was so many questions of why.
Yeah.
Why did I go from such a horrible relationship to God putting this wonderful man in my life and then all of a sudden he takes him away from me?
Hmm.
I have felt like I've had a call on my life since I was, well, it's been 24 years because I was pregnant with my first son and I was at a Beth Moore conference.
Okay.
And as I'm sitting there and she's speaking, I literally heard God say, "You're going to be on that stage one day." Well, maybe it's not at the Coliseum here,
Yeah.
but I knew I was going to be on a stage. I knew I was supposed
Yeah.
to speak. I knew I was supposed to write. But boy, he took me through 24-year journey.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, God, why aren't you opening the doors? Why aren't they opening?
Hmm.
But I had a lot of growing to do. And part of it was humility. I had to become more humble. And so he had to give me my story. And
Yeah.
it was a tough one. And
Yeah.
so after Mark had left, and I really started feeling like God was tugging on me that it was time to start at least stepping into that call.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sitting on my bed and I'm like, okay, God, is this really you? Because he had given me this vision that I had that I kind of described in the book. And as I'm sitting there, I just heard him say, Valerie, if you do this and you follow me in obedience, you may have to be willing to lose your dream home, your dream business, and one of your sons to drugs and alcohol. And
Mm.
boy, that puts you on pause.
Yeah.
So I just sat there and it's like, yes, Lord, use me as your instrument. Do whatever we have to do. Just use me.
Wow.
And I think, I had someone question me. Matter of fact, it might have been
It
you.
might have been me.
Might have been you. Is
Is
like,
that I'm not
how
so
did
sure
you
I'd
get to
say
that
yes.
point? Yeah, how did you get to that point? It was Lee. She says, how did you get to that point of being able to say yes? Because if God told me I was going to have to lose my son, I don't know if I could say yes to that.
Yeah.
And I really had to take a couple days and think about that. And
Mm-hmm.
really, it's because I have just seen him work in so many ways throughout my life because I've been through child abuse, a lot of things that I had to go through as a child that I just continued to see God work in my life and I knew I could trust him.
Yeah.
And I really thought about how the fact that, God gave up his son.
Mm-hmm.
Should I be willing to give up my own for the sake of somebody else? I just knew, and I knew I had to say yes, and that he was going to get me through that, that he would give me the strength to get through that if that's what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And there was a sermon I heard by Joyce Meyer one time, and her husband loved to play golf. And so she asked him, she says, hey, Dave, she says, if you could never play golf again, what would you do?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I've thought about that, and I've already decided that I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that has really stuck with me. And I just came to the place where it's like, this is what I'm going to decide to do. And I'm going to be okay because I know God's going to get me through it.
Yeah, I remember that story and the whole idea of, because at some point we never know what's going to happen. And I don't think God would give me a heads up on that one because I'm not
Mhm.
sure I'd be able to say yes as well. Because there have been times where I'm like, God, I really want you to use me, but I'm not so sure I want that kind of a
Right.
story. I really don't know if I want to do that. So I'm not sure he would give me a heads up. But I do remember that story with Joyce and Dave Meyer, where he says, I've already decided ahead of time that if that day ever comes, which it may, he's already made the decision that he will be okay. And so many times in life we do, I think we can focus on what we don't have, or we can focus on what we do.
Yes.
And we can also, as sad as we are to miss out on something that we dearly loved, we can also recognize that there's still some other things going on. We can kind of hold both of them at the same time. We can hold the loss and what we do have and the joy in the same hand. And
Right.
I suspect was that any part
Yeah.
of yours in the face of extreme loss is finding those things to hold on to that were good.
Yes. When Mark had left, I found myself where I just could not feel joy. And no matter what I was doing, and my mom had come to visit me, and we're sitting out on the porch looking out over the pond. And I said, Mom, I said, I just can't find any joy. And
Hmm.
she says, well, honey, you're grieving. And I'd never thought about it until that point that
Yeah.
that's what was happening. And never experiencing it before at that level, I didn't know what to do with that
Hmm.
because I've always been a person of confidence and security and just a strong person. But I finally found myself at my own weakness. And I remember laying in bed one morning and all of a sudden I hear the sound of the songbird out my window. And I just love the sound of that when I wake up. And it's
Yeah.
so refreshing. It's a new day and you're starting over. And I'm laying there thinking about that. And it's like, I find joy in this. And
Mm.
so every day I intentionally tried to find joy in something. It was joy in the laughter of my kids, or it was joy in seeing my mom, just spending time with my mom. that's what I started holding on to. I'm still grieving, I'm still hurting,
Yeah.
and I'm still in a deep hole, a very dark, dark place. But at the same time, little by little, by focusing on something every day that I found joy in, I eventually began to creep out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, life goes on. We live in a fallen world.
Yeah, we
And
do.
life is just, my pastor's just been preaching on this. Life is not fair. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And once we have that reality that we are going to face adversity, we are going to face loss, struggles. Once we come to the realization of that, then we have to be able to find the way to not keep ourselves in the pit.
Yeah.
And I also remember a story of a lady who she was on the radio, I believe, and talking about how depressed she was, and she's in bed and she wouldn't get out of bed. And her husband finally comes in and he says, "Look, you need to get out of bed and get rid of the pity party." And that, it felt a little harsh, but at the same time,
Yeah.
that is reality at times.
Mm-hmm.
That was another lesson I learned, especially after hearing that. It stuck with me because it's like, okay, I'm sad today. I'm going through a lot of
Yeah.
crap. Okay.
Yeah. And
But
that's a nice word for it.
yes, forgive me.
Yeah. Oh no, you can say that word.
But I'm going to give myself 2 or 3 days to cry,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to get back up and I'm going to go do life again
Mm-hmm.
because life has to keep going. And when you're staying that down, it's not only affecting you and your health, it's also affecting everybody around you because
Yeah.
it affects your family.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to keep going. And so making that decision right there was another thing. I had to make a decision that when bad things happen, I have to continue going.
Yeah.
I have to continue finding a way to find that joy.
Yeah. Well, and I like that you pointed out that you were going to give yourself time to grieve though, because
Yes.
sometimes what we want to do with the grief is just hurry up, box it up and stuff it in an
Yeah.
attic or a garage and not think about it, but then it just kind of simmers
Yeah.
inside because we also need to process it and allow ourselves to grieve and knowing that grief is not a linear process. It's not, you don't necessarily one day you're angry and the next day you deny and then the next day you don't go through it or hour by hour. It's not always a linear. You think you've accepted it and then the next thing you know you're angry again. And you're
Right.
kind of processing it through. But then, as you said, there gets to be a point where you allow yourself to grieve. You
Yeah.
give yourself time to rest. I listened to something this morning where that is one of the things that physically for our brain, we need to rest. We need to give our bodies and our minds a chance to rest more when we're grieving so
Mhm.
that we can heal properly, as opposed to just burying it and then keep going. Keep going, but keep going while processing it and
Right.
giving ourselves the ability to rest or to cry and then move on and do something else and keep going.
The other thing that I found helpful was being able to help other people who
Hmm.
are hurting. And that definitely was a healer for me, is taking the focus off of my pain and finding out what I could do to help somebody else. That
Hmm.
made a huge difference for me.
Yeah, I have found that if I'm having a bad day for whatever reason, circumstances, moods, hormones, Saturn's rings are not in alignment, finding something that I can do for someone else does help because it does. It brings me joy when I know that I've done something nice for someone, whether they know that I've done it or not. It may be an anonymous thing, but
Right.
I can get excited about doing something nice for someone or just sending somebody a text and a funny gif or
Yes.
making them smile. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It
Right.
it can literally be, I don't want to get out of bed, but I'm going to get out of bed and get dressed and go take a walk around the block or just something.
You were mentioning about, we do have to take the time to process, and we haven't spoken much about the story as far as my youngest son had an overdose 2 times.
Hmm.
So the second one that happened, I was numb. I was numb for 5 days.
Mm,
I stood by his bedside, and I'm normally a very emotional person, but for whatever reason, it wasn't hitting right then, whether it was shock or whatever. But
yeah.
and that was the first time. Well, actually, it was the first overdose. And I'm standing by his bed, and it's like, okay, God, is this it? Is this what you mean by losing my son? And I really didn't think he would make it that night. Well, I didn't cry for 5 days. And then I'm standing in, had a printing business at the time, and I went in to pick up an order from another contractor. And the lady at the register, she says, so how you doing? And I bust down bawling in front of her. And of
Mm,
course, all the other employees in the office are turning around looking and trying to figure out what's going on. And that was kind of an eye opener for me that you do have to stop and let the tears roll because at
yeah.
some point in time they're going to surface
Yeah.
and it might not be a good time.
Yeah, it may not be a very convenient time. I know
Yeah.
there have been times in my life where I'm like, okay, I'm going to hold it together. I'm going to hold it together. And then, oh,
Yes.
a couple of times I've had to sing, and the song is very emotional and touches
Yeah.
me. And I'll practice and I'll get all choked up. And I'm like, okay, that's my sign to go find a nice quiet corner. For whatever reason, this song is hitting me and I don't want it to interrupt the performance. And, in the middle of the church service, everybody, whatever. So I'm just going to
Right.
go find a nice quiet corner. I'm going to go cry for a little bit. Then I'm going to fix my mascara,
There you
take a
go.
deep breath, and then I'm going to actually get through the song later
Yes.
on in church so that I'm going to go have my moment and then I won't have
Yes.
my moment in public. Oh
Yes.
my gosh. So you mentioned your son, and they actually both ended up having problems with drugs and alcohol, and they told some of their stories, but they have made it through. So there are a lot of blessings in that with their story. And what are some of those lessons when looking at your son and going through this for a parent whose child is making poor decisions, whether it is drugs, alcohol, other poor decisions? What were some of the lessons that you learned to help them, to support them, love them, but also establish boundaries?
Right.
What are some of those lessons that you learned?
It is really hard to make the decisions of where those boundaries are.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, when growing up, my childhood wasn't perfect, and I didn't have the support from my family. If I made a
Mm-hmm.
mistake, it was, we're not going to talk to you for a while. And that was very hard because you felt like you couldn't count on your family.
Yeah.
And I had made the decision that no matter what my kids did, I was going to make sure they knew that I loved them through it all and
Mm-hmm.
that I would always be there. But at the same time, we did put those boundaries in. And my youngest son, David, he was young enough, he blamed us because we had actually taken him to the police station the very first time that we caught him, hoping that that would scare him enough that it wasn't going to happen again.
Yeah.
But our community was just flooded with it. And it's extremely hard when you're a Christian family and your children have been raised in church. They know right and wrong, and they go down this path,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it's both of them.
Yeah.
And so that was the hardest part for us. And then, of course, I was a single mom, so I was trying to deal with that too. But through it all, I continue to make sure that they knew that I love them no matter what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that, there was times where David's like, well, this is all your fault. I wouldn't be here if you wouldn't have told him all the truth. And it's like, we tell him all the truth. We're going to tell him the truth. So they were learning lessons through the process.
Yeah.
And there was when he finally turned 18, and he went back to jail again. I told him, I said, I'm not going to courtroom anymore. I love you, but I'm not going to go in the courtroom anymore because you are the one who are making these decisions, and it's time for you to have to suffer the consequences for those. These are not my choices for you. This isn't where I want you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was kind of a little bit of a wake up call because mom was no longer holding his hand through it or trying to get him, bail him out.
Yeah.
And that was hard because in the beginning, we're trying to find ways to support him and get him in rehab and help the situation. And always just young enough and making a mistake here. But when it became a pattern, then
Yeah.
things had to change.
Yeah, I know
And
sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between being, supportive and then enabling.
yes, correct. Yes. So there was different things where we had to just finally say, you're going to have to take care of this. You're going to have to talk to this person. You have to call the attorney this time. You're going to have to pay for it this time. Because we spent thousands of
Mm,
dollars
Yeah.
in the first few years between the two of them. And it's like, you're crippling us.
Yeah.
We're working too. And it was hard. There was times where they were angry because we weren't stepping in there. But, I
Yeah.
think they just had to learn some things the hard way, like we all have to.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And well, and one of the things that I thought of when you were talking about this is the mom guilt. I think
Yes.
moms, women and moms especially, they're pros at taking on the guilt of everything else when it's not necessarily our guilt to
Right.
hold on to, or there may be parts where we can go, okay, well, yeah, I could have handled something different, but at the same time, that's not my choice. That you were making those choices. How did you deal with the mom guilt? I mean, one, you, as you said, you were very active in church. You were known as Christians, and then here you have both of your sons making these choices. And I suspect there may have been at least one or two people going,
Yes.
whether they voiced it or not.
Yeah, and a few did, and it was family, which made it even harder.
Yeah,
I was getting the guilt trip that it was my fault because of the marriage that I was in, which had I known it was going to go in that direction, I certainly wouldn't have gone into it.
yeah,
But I also probably stayed in it too long, and that is part of the story about that relationship when I finally had to make the decision that it was time to. I
yeah.
had to protect the boys, not just myself.
Hmm.
And as I'm watching them go up the stairs and that teenage anger and rage is on their face, it's like this is not going to end well.
No.
How much of that relationship and what they were seeing at home actually affected them into the drugs? And I've asked about the boys that, and they said no, it was just their own choices because of the groups that they were hanging with, and the guilt part was extremely hard. And sometimes it still creeps up. I'm still
Yeah.
asking myself, was this my fault? Did I stay in it too long? Of course, your surroundings affect your children
Hmm.
and at their age that they were, very much so.
Yeah.
What I've come to hold on to is the fact that at a certain age, your children make their own decisions. And God will he has to be the one to reach them, and you can continue to pray for them. That is the most powerful thing,
Yeah.
is moms and dads stay on your knees
Hmm.
and you don't give up on them, and you continue to make sure that they know that you love them no matter what.
Yeah.
And for my own part's sake, I had to stop listening to the enemy's lies of this is all your fault,
Hmm.
because they were at that age that they could have chose a different path. They didn't have to go down that path. And it's kind of like another thing that Joyce Myers had talked about was her brother.
Yeah.
They both came from the same family,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of abuse from her father. And the brother chose to go into drugs and alcohol, ended up dying in an abandoned home by
Hmm.
himself. And look where Joyce is at. She chose a different path. She chose to hang on to God, and now she's affecting thousands of lives. So
Yeah.
everybody has a choice on which direction they're going to take in life.
Yeah. We do.
We just can't blame other people for those choices.
Hmm. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and hopefully, some moms will be able to let go of some of the non-healthy guilt
Yes.
that is out there that can certainly be very crippling. And Valerie, there's so many other things that we could talk about in your story, and you mentioned that there had been a call for a long time, and there may be somebody else out there that kind of feels a little bit of a call and something that God has placed in their heart. And I would love for you to tell us what you would say to encourage someone to actually pursue the passion that God has placed in their hearts. And hopefully, they won't have to go through everything you went through. But what
Yes.
would you say to encourage them to say yes and follow that passion that He's placed in their heart?
Well, another lesson that I learned through this is I didn't understand why God wasn't opening the door for me when years ago. This has been a 24-year process.
Mm-hmm.
So why didn't I get to start speaking sooner? But that was because there was things that he needed to work in me to become who I am now so that I could handle this kind of a ministry,
Mm-hmm.
because you're working with people's hearts. And I needed to become more humble on that. And so there's times where it's God who is keeping the door closed for a little while to make sure that you're ready for that position, because it's a very big position and it affects a lot of people. But at the same time, when I did feel like he was leading and it was time, is I began to take steps forward. If you listen to David Jeremiah's sermons on his sermon series Forward, or his book, it's amazing. And it kind of pushed me a little bit. And it's no different than if you're in high school and you're looking at your future and going, okay, I think I want to become a graphic designer. Well, I went to college to be a graphic designer.
Mm-hmm.
So I started preparing myself for ministry by going to the Speak Up conference,
Yes.
so that I could learn how to write, how to speak, and how to be prepared for this ministry. And so if there's anything that I could do to encourage someone feeling called, it's start taking those steps to get there. And I think that's harder for us as adults.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you are young, everything is about college or, Ivy Tech school or something like that to prepare you for your future. But when you're already in the midst of life and you've got kids and a home to take care of, that could be scary.
Yeah.
But there's lots of things you can be doing with the online presence now. You can be Googling, doing your research on whatever it is that you're feeling
Mm-hmm.
called to do.
Yeah.
Start getting ready, because I'll tell you what, when God finally opens the door, it flings open and you better be ready to run.
And you have been running
Yeah.
with this and everything else that you have going on. Well, Valerie, thank you for being brave enough to share your story and brave enough to say yes to God and be obedient in that and take the time to speak to us today. If someone wants to connect with you and learn more, get the book and that, how can they best connect with you?
Okay, so the book is on Amazon now, and it's called Finding Hope When Storms Don't Cease.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can find it under my name, Valerie Juillerat. You could also email me at valerie@valeriejuillerat.com.
Okay.
And then we're on Facebook as well.
Very good. Very good. Well, Valerie, once again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me today on A Woman's Heart. I'm Lisa Granger. I hope you are encouraged by Valerie to persevere through whatever storms you are facing. And I would like to make sure that what I'm sharing on the show continues to encourage you this year. Find me on social media or email me at lisa@lisagranger.com to let me know what you have enjoyed and what you would like to hear in the future. Until next time, have a blessed day.